everybody, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about what goes in an IRB document. What kinds of information are you specifically expected to provide? I'm going to show you a sample of what one looks like, a blank one, but with all the questions right now. Okay, so what you're seeing here is the proposal, the main form that I have from my university's IRB. Now, IRBs are not standardized. So what I'm going to show you, this may not look exactly like what you have to do, but you're going to have to answer similar kinds of questions and provide similar kinds of information. So what I want to do in this video is go through this document. If I've taken out like phone numbers, links, and stuff like that, names, to people at the university. So if you notice some gaps, that's what you're noticing. But what I want to do is go through and just give you like a big picture overview about the kinds of things you have to put in an IRB proposal. Now, there's probably going to be some questions that come up about like, well, how exactly do I word that? What kind of information goes here? And while I might touch on some of that here and there, I'm going to do some subsequent videos and I'll point this out along the way, diving into more detail about specific things. So let's get down here into the actual questions. Now, when you look at this, it can look, I'm going to just scroll through here. It can look a little overwhelming at first, right? You've got all of these questions you have to attend to, but really it's not that bad. Okay. Now, personally, I do get a little bored writing this. I do find the writing to be incredibly dry. So I will work about maybe 45 minutes to an hour on this and then stop. Okay. I try to give myself space because I know that otherwise I'll just fry my brain. But it doesn't take that long to do. Especially, I would say this, the first time you do this, it may take long to do because you have to get your head around it. But once you learn the lay of the land, these things, super easy, okay? So here we go. What's in an IRB? Well, first of all, they want information about you, if you're the project investigator. If there's any co-PIs, right, you have to put all that information in. And if you're a student, right, you would still put your name up here, but you would have your faculty supervisor, right, your committee chair, right, go in there. So that's pretty straightforward. And then it does tell you right here, if the PI is a graduate student or an undergraduate student, right, submit the research supervisor approval form from the faculty advisor. So just make sure that if you're a grad student doing this, that you're following the proper protocols in terms of how things get submitted and the kinds of information that you need to include about yourself and about your whoever's supervising it. Okay. So title of study, not hard. How long it's going to last, okay? Anticipated. Now, what I always include in here is also data analysis, okay? So let's say I'm going to collect data for 3 months, and then I know I'm going to need maybe 6 months to analyze my data or whatever, okay? I do that. I usually give myself a little bit of a cushion. The thing to know, right, is that it's anticipated. They're not holding me to it. And if something goes wrong, and let's say data collection starts a month later than I projected or 2 months later or whatever, you can usually always apply for an extension. So when you get this back, it'll say, hey, it's been approved, and usually it'll come with a date, right? It's good through such and such a date. And if you need an extension, it's not hard to get. You don't have to fill out this whole big form again. And again, how that looks will vary based on institution, and you can look into that. But do know this. Usually you have to have your IRB active all the way through data analysis, okay? So don't just put down, if your data collection is going to be 3 months, don't just put down 3 months. Give yourself time for data analysis. All right, purpose of the research project, use, here it's give the objectives and significance and your references. So I put the research questions in here, right? The purpose of this project is to answer the following questions, and I just bullet point the questions. And then I write 2 to 3 paragraphs about the significance. I've never had anybody ask me for more than that, okay? All right. And then you're going to describe your potential participants, their age, their gender, how they're going to be recruited, how many you expect, if there's compensation. And so if there's compensation, you'll want to look into how your university addresses that and any other forms that you might need to complete. Description of special classes. I'm not 100% sure what that is. It's never applied to me. So, again, this is something where like, if you're reading the directions on your IRB form and you're like, I don't know what that is, contact your IRB office. They're more than happy to help you. criteria for exclusion, or you might also see criteria for inclusion. Okay. There's nothing wrong with saying you have to exclude people. So for example, I work in schools. I might say this project, can only include 8th grade English teachers. So obviously if you're an 8th grade science teacher, you can't be in this study. There's nothing wrong with that, right? The study's bound in certain ways. And if it's meant to study English and it's going to be set in an 8th grade context and it's studying some kind of instructional practice in English, then, it is what it is. So you just have to lay that out for people. And then your procedures. Okay, this is your methods. What are your participants going to do? Okay, what will non-participants do? I've never had this come up. I've always put NA for this. If the research is conducted in a classroom and some students participate and some don't. That could happen. So if you're going to have a group, right, from 9 to 10, you're in a classroom and half the class is going to do one thing and half the class is going to do something else. You just have to explain that. What will participants be told about the research project? So how are you going to present it to them? You're there explaining what it is that you're studying. And you may have to write this a few different ways. So like, for example, I might study teachers and students. I might have 2 different populations in my study. And so I need to explain, especially because one's an adult population, one's a minor population. Here's how I would explain it to the teachers and what they're doing and what I'm studying. And here's how I would explain it to the kids. Okay, so you might need to have more than one explanation around that. Will deception be used? I've never used deception, but if it is, say why and explain how you're going to debrief after and let them know what they experienced. Estimated time requirements. Where is the research taking place? Qualitative, quantitative, mixed method. They don't ever ask, you'll see in here, like from my data sources. Please describe how and when participants may terminate participation. So I try to give people a lot of options on that. Like they can call me, they can email me. This will also be in your consent forms and your assent forms if you use assent forms. And then I also say things like they can just verbally tell me, right? Especially if you're working with like kids. Like I don't want to tell the kids you have to call me or you have to send me an email or you have to text me. I mean, it's fine if a kid says, I don't want to do this anymore. Okay, that's fine. If this applies to you, description of biological samples. And then description of equipment to be used on or by participants. So you can see this is nothing terribly difficult. Then we get into confidentiality, okay? Explain if they will be identified by name, appearance, or the nature of the data, okay? So for me, because I do a lot of work in classrooms, right? If I give an assessment or a survey, their names are on it, all right? So I have to explain that. I never collect personal health information, so that's a no for me. But you can see if you do, I took the link out, but there's a manual that would talk about what kinds of things need to go in there, okay? Is the research going to be anonymous or confidential? I think I'm probably going to do another video, do a deep dive on this. But anonymous means that as the researcher, I never know who the identity of the participants. Okay, there's no identifiers on their data. Confidential means, like I said, I give an assessment, they put their name on it. I know who it is, right? But I'm not going to share that information with the world. I'm not going to share Michael got an 85 on his assessment, right? Or whatever, right? So it's confidential to me, but it's not anonymous. And we'll do a whole other video on that. Explaining the procedure that will be used to protect privacy and confidentiality. Again, I'm going to do another video on that so we can go over that in more detail, but you will have to be able to explain that. How will data be stored? And where is it going to be stored, right? And for how long is it going to be stored? You have to explain that. How long are the data and the consent forms and all of those documents, how long are they going to be stored? And note here, you have to have it on file for at least 3 years, okay? Who's going to have access to the data? And then benefits to participants, indirect research benefits, direct research benefits, but not incentives. So I'll do a whole separate video on indirect versus direct research benefits, but just know that you're going to have to talk, you'll probably have to talk about that. You'll have to talk about benefits to some extent. Risk to participants. I never have any real risk to participants in my studies, but you want to pay attention because you can't just say there's no risk involved, even if that's really basically true. My IRB office wants me to say minimal risk is involved, and it's just really minimal risk is involved in participating in the study. And you know, you might say something like, well, they may have a sentence that you can use specifically for this. but you do need to say this, right? Like why, and it says, and explain why is it minimal, right? An example would be, I don't know, maybe somebody finds out your test scores, or maybe you get bored doing it, right? Boredom is, I guess that's a risk, I guess, right? But according to them, but I never have to really put anything serious in there. Description of procedure to obtain informed consent. And again, I'm going to do a whole video on consent and assent and the difference between the two and how you work with minors around getting assent. But consent is anybody 18 and up, and minors are under the assent applies to minors, so anybody under the age of 18. So how are you going to approach people and get consent? Who is going to be responsible for obtaining that consent? How are you going to explain? How will information be relayed to the participant? So you've got a couple of things going on here where number one, earlier on we saw, how are you going to explain to participants what they're going to be doing in the study? But now what we're talking about here is how are you going to explain the consent form to them? Are you going to read it to them? Do they read it by themselves and ask you questions? And this also applies with assent, right? You can see that right here. How are you going to obtain assent? Okay, you'll have to explain that as well if you use kids. Provide a description of feedback, debriefing, or if there's a counseling referral. That never applies to me, the counseling referral part. That will be provided if it's relevant. If children are involved, who is obtaining assent, who's obtaining assent, right? And then how are you obtaining assent? I'm getting twisted. And then you've got survey instruments. So here is where you put your attachments are going to be your consent forms, your assent forms. We'll take a look at those in a separate video. And then like interview questions, surveys, anything like that. You're going to, for me, I would include them as separate attachments. So right, like attachment 1, consent form, attachment 2, assent form, attachment 3, interview questions, right? That sort of a thing. And then there's a couple other things here, right? If you're going to recruit or be doing your study inside a school or a hospital, they want a letter from the institution saying that that institution, that school or that hospital agrees to having you come in. That's not hard to do. You get in touch like with a school, with the principal or a vice principal kind of a thing. And then if collaborators or students are helping with the research, but they're not co-investigators. So maybe they're not going, into the field, but maybe they are helping with some data analysis, okay? But they're not going to be listed as a PI. Then provide the names in an attachment because they just want to make sure that those people have had human subjects training and they want to verify that. So as you can see, and that's it. This is not, like I said, it's not overwhelming, but sometimes it can seem that way. It's not anything particularly exciting. It does help you think some things through in your research. It might help you refine some of your ideas. And you fill that out and you send it in. And so, like I said, we'll be going into a deeper dive on things like consent and assent and confidentiality versus anonymity, and how you get assent from kids, how you explain it to them, that sort of a thing. But if you have questions about things that you specifically want to know in relation to writing an IRB proposal, please head down in the comments and let me know so I can make sure and get a video for you on that.